That evening, the lights were already glowing through the front window, that golden haze of warmth meant to signal something like love. I parked at the curb, stayed in the car longer than I needed to, watching my own breath fog the windshield. It was the kind of house that had held up, even though everything inside it had fallen apart years ago. But we still came. That was the unspoken agreement. I rang the doorbell, knowing full well no one would answer it. They never did. Just walk in. My mother always shouted when I complained, "It's your home too." So I opened the door, set my bag by the coat rack, and stepped onto the carpet that still had the faint bleach stain from when I spilled ginger ale at 13, and my mother made me scrub it on my knees for an hour. "She's here!" someone yelled from the kitchen. I heard a chorus of clinking, a drawer slamming, and laughter that sounded too rehearsed. I walked in to find them halfway through wine, charcuterie plates half dismantled, my mother fanning herself with the oven mitt like it was Florida in July. "There she is," she said with a smile too stretched, too many teeth. "We started without you." "I wasn't late," I said, and kissed her cheek anyway. I nodded at my father, who grunted, then turned back to carving something unnecessarily aggressive with the electric knife. And then, of course, there was Daniel, my brother, who stood by the counter with a glass of Malbec in one hand and my mother's attention in the other. "Hey, stranger," he said, not moving. I nodded. "Daniel?" He had that smug ease about him again, the kind he wore when he thought he was on the cusp of something great, or more accurately, when he had managed to convince everyone else he was. Daniel had a talent for bluffing his way into rooms he didn't belong in, and charming people into letting him stay. We sat down for dinner. The usual performance. My mother asked me how work was, not waiting for the answer. My father launched into a story about a neighbor's fence being too close to the property line. Daniel just smirked and swirled his wine. I picked at the roasted vegetables, trying to decide when I could politely leave, and then it happened. "We're just so relieved Daniel doesn't have to stress about the fund anymore," my mother said between bites. "It's a weight off all of us." I blinked. "What fund?" They went quiet for half a beat. Then Daniel laughed like it was nothing. "Oh, the family trust," he said casually. "Dad and Mom finally released it to me outright. Makes things easier with the business and all." My fork hit the plate. "The family trust," I repeated. "The one Grandpa left to be split equally?" My mother gave me a soft pity smile. "Well, honey, it's not like you needed it. You've always been more stable." "Stable," I echoed. "You make good money, don't you?" Dad chimed in, not looking up. "And you don't have a startup bleeding capital." "She doesn't have a family to support either," Mom added, as if I hadn't just heard her slap me in the face. I sat still, hands under the table, gripping the edge so tight my fingers went cold. My eyes flicked to Daniel, who just sipped his wine. "It's not a big deal," he said. "You've got your life together. I don't." "And that's my reward?" I said quietly. "Being too functional to be considered?" "It's not like that," Mom said quickly. "It's just that, well, Daniel's been through so much, he really needs the help." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even argue. I set my fork down gently, wiped the corner of my mouth with a napkin like I was on a date with someone I hated, and said, "Thank you for dinner, I should head out." "Oh, come on," Dad barked. "You're not going to be dramatic about this." "I'm not being dramatic," I said. "I'm just full." Daniel didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He'd already won the night, and he knew it. I stood up, walked past the coat rack without picking up my things, and let the door shut behind me without a word. In the car I sat still. My hands trembled in my lap. Not from shock, not even from betrayal, from confirmation. All those years, all those birthdays, all those favor asks and, "You understand, don't you," moments, had led to this dinner. They had prepared me to swallow this exact injustice with poise. But that night, I decided I wouldn't. I didn't drive home. I drove straight to my office. It was nearly 10 p.m., but I had a key. I sat at my desk under the awful fluorescent lights, opened my files, and pulled up the documents for Dan's startup, where my name was listed quietly as a private guarantor. Then I opened my personal account, looked at the wire instructions, and began quietly rewriting the rules. My name is Marissa Trent. I'm a senior operations manager at a mid-sized logistics firm in Chicago. I live a quiet life in a quiet building with no doorman, one cat, and a rent-controlled lease I'll never give up. No spouse, no kids. Not because I didn't want them, because I learned early that wanting something doesn't mean anyone will help you get it. Especially not in my family. Daniel is 3 years younger, born with a dimpled smile and the kind of charisma that made teachers forgive him for not doing his homework. I was the planner, the early riser, the one who cleaned up after his tantrums and made her own Halloween costume from leftover felt while Mom tried to soothe his sensitivities. It wasn't always outright. Sometimes it was just glances. The way my father clapped Daniel on the back when he brought home a B, but barely looked up when I made honor roll. Or how my mother called Daniel her baby, well into his 20s, but would sigh when I said I was tired from work. "You've always been so serious, Marissa." The first time I learned that serious meant invisible was the fall I turned 19. I'd been accepted to Northwestern with a partial scholarship and had worked all summer at the bookstore to make up the rest. The night before move-in, my financial aid package changed. My father had submitted some tax update too late, and now my expected family contribution had ballooned. We needed an extra $6,000, fast. I went to him that night, my heart pounding, hands clammy. I laid the papers out like a student giving a final presentation. "It's just a loan," I said. "I can pay it back over the next year." My father looked at me, annoyed. "Do you think I'm made of money? But you said you were setting something aside for this." "I was," he said, "until Daniel needed braces." Daniel wasn't even in school that year. He was working at a ski resort in Colorado, figuring things out. My mother didn't look up from the sink. She just said, "You'll make it work. You always do." I did. I deferred a semester, took on another job, ate canned soup for 2 months, and still graduated on time. And nobody remembered. Or if they did, they never spoke of it again. There was a pattern. Daniel made mistakes, I made adjustments. He dropped out of college, I helped him retype his resume. He crashed Dad's old car, I picked him up and drove him to court. He dated a girl who drained his savings and left him with a dog he didn't want. I paid the vet bills and found the dog a home. I was useful, quietly essential. But never once was I seen as someone who needed anything. When Grandpa died, I flew home to help sort through the paperwork. Grandpa had been a self-made man, ran a hardware store for 30 years, and left behind a decent nest egg. His will, drafted 3 years before his death, clearly stated the trust would go equally to his grandchildren, to be divided evenly between Marissa Trent and Daniel Trent in acknowledgement of their futures. I remembered reading that line in the lawyer's office, sitting in a pleather chair with my knees bouncing. Grandpa had hugged me after my college graduation and told me, "You know the value of $1. That's why I know you'll do right by this." What I didn't know, what I only found out over that dinner, was that my parents had gained trustee control when Grandpa got sick. And they used that control to bypass his wishes. Quietly, legally, completely. They told themselves I was fine, that I had no family to support. As my mother said with a straight face while handing Daniel a check, she pretended wasn't mine too. She used to collect teacups. Dozens of them lined the shelf above the fridge. I gave her her first one when I was 9, bought from a yard sale with my own allowance. She'd called it precious. But that night at dinner, she poured my wine into a paper cup while Daniel drank from crystal. I don't even think she noticed. There were little things like that. Symbols that piled up, like snow. One of them was the key, the spare key to my apartment, which I'd given to Daniel after he had a breakup and needed a place to crash. He only stayed 2 weeks, but he never returned it. I asked once, gently. He laughed and said, "You know I'm not going to rob you, right?" I changed the locks a month later. He never noticed. I learned to live like that. Around them. Quietly. I sent birthday cards, I showed up for holidays, I donated to their causes, and I paid attention. When Daniel launched his company, an online platform for subscription-based craft whiskey, I reviewed his pitch deck, made notes, and found it riddled with gaps. But I didn't say anything, I just waited. He came to me for help a few months later, casually, like it was nothing. "Just need someone reliable to co-sign a line of credit," he said. "You're good at paperwork." I signed, and then I made a copy of everything he gave me. I stored it in a folder marked Trusted Accounts on my personal drive. Not because I expected anything to go wrong, but because I no longer trusted how memory worked in our family, especially when it came to me. They always remembered my competence. They never remembered my cost. That's why, when they gave Daniel the trust and told me I didn't need it, I didn't explode. I just remembered, and I began subtracting myself. The next day, I called the bank and removed myself as co-guarantor from Daniel's credit agreement. The terms allowed it with 30 days' notice and a proof of conflict. I submitted both. Then I declined the invitation to invest in Dad's new condo project. I didn't explain. I just stopped replying to the thread. Then I changed my email, changed my locks again. Archived every photo where I was cropped behind Daniel's smile. I kept only one, the one of Grandpa and me sitting in front of his hardware store, both of us in flannel, holding mugs with steam curling out. Mine had chipped. His was smooth. He gave me that mug later. I still have it. It's the only thing in my apartment I've never moved from its shelf. A small, ordinary mug, white, with a red stripe around the rim. Every time I look at it, I remember that he saw me. That once, someone did. I thought of that mug the night after the dinner, when I sat at my desk clicking through Daniel's financial documents. I saw the bleeding, payments to consultants who never delivered, digital ads with no ROI, inflated office supply charges. He was underwater. He just didn't know it yet. And when he did, he was going to need help. And I was going to be ready. The most dangerous decisions I've ever made were the quiet ones. Not the confrontational, table-flipping, accusation-hurling kinds that erupt in movies. No, the ones that looked like nothing at all. A nod, a closed door, a delayed response to a text. That's how you cut someone out of your life without drawing blood. After the dinner, I didn't call anyone. I didn't vent to friends. I didn't post a cryptic quote on social media. I simply shifted into another mode, observation without participation. It was like stepping out of my body and watching the entire family rotate around a center I no longer pretended to orbit. Daniel texted me the next week. "Can you send the Excel from the whiskey campaign audit? I think I lost it." I replied, "I no longer have access. Good luck." He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. That was the last thing he said for 2 weeks. During that time, I declined 2 more requests. One from my mother asking if I could help Daniel apply for some small biz grant, because you're good with government forms. And another from my father asking if I could review a deed transfer for a property he was selling. I told them I was busy with quarter end. They didn't follow up. I'd spent so many years maintaining the family infrastructure, offering advice, catching errors, sending reminders for bills they were supposed to remember themselves. That withdrawing wasn't loud, it was invisible. Like cutting the power to a house with no windows. They wouldn't notice until the freezer stank. But I didn't stop at withdrawal. I wanted insulation. Daniel's startup had one real asset: its mailing list of 30,000 subscribers. I knew because I'd helped him set up the CRM integration 6 months ago when he called me in a panic at midnight after his intern accidentally deleted the primary account. I recovered it. Then I quietly logged in again that night after the dinner. He hadn't changed the password. Of course not. He never did. I didn't tamper. I exported the data, saved it in a zip folder with the label "backup needed for audit" in case I ever needed leverage. Then I logged out and deleted my access. It felt clean. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't someone's plan B. I wasn't the shadow support system under Daniel's dreams. I was just me. And it turned out I'd been building a lot more than I realized. With the energy I used to spend fixing his problems, I turned inward. I restructured my retirement accounts, consolidated my student loans. I sat down with a friend financial planner, and finally figured out how much I'd saved, how much I'd lost, and how much was recoverable. I found out that if I kept living the way I was, I could afford to leave corporate life by 50. So I set a date on my calendar, June 1st, 15 years from now, my last Monday. I had that white mug with the red stripe sitting beside me when I circled the date. But clarity invites intrusion. Like clockwork, Daniel returned. It was a Thursday, raining, mid-afternoon. I was wrapping up a logistics briefing for a major food distributor when the receptionist pinged me. "There's someone here asking for you, says it's urgent. A Daniel Trent?" I didn't reply right away. I looked out the window, watched the rain hit the glass in soft little shocks. Then I typed back, "Send him to conference room B. I'll be there in 10. I didn't run, I didn't prep. I made him wait. When I walked in, he was pacing, hair damp, eyes bloodshot. Wearing a hoodie I recognized from 5 years ago when he'd slept on my couch and cried over a woman who ghosted him after 6 months. He turned too fast when I entered. "Hey," he said. I sat down. "Daniel?" He didn't sit. He rubbed his palms on his jeans. "Look, I wouldn't come here if it weren't serious. I assumed as much. It's the business. I need a bridge loan, just something to get through the next month or two. Our next funding round is delayed and..." I held up a hand. "How much?" He blinked. "What? How much are you asking for?" He hesitated. 15. I tilted my head. 1,000? He nodded quickly. "Yes, I know it's a lot, but you're the only one I can trust. I didn't tell Mom or Dad. They don't know how bad it is." I crossed my legs slowly. "You mean the fund's gone?" His jaw tensed. "You burned through a 6-figure trust in less than a year?" He looked down. "There were costs, and I made some bad calls." I waited. "And now our vendor's pulling out if I don't pay the invoice." I nodded. "So this is where you come back to me, because now I finally qualify as someone with value." He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. "I have something for you," I said, reaching into my bag. He looked hopeful. "Really?" I pulled out a folder. plain navy blue. Inside, a copy of the original will, the one Grandpa wrote before his stroke, the one I'd scanned and saved the day I first saw it. Daniel took it with confusion, flipped through the pages. His face shifted as he read. "I thought," he started. "You thought wrong," I said. "He meant for us to share it, but our parents decided you needed it more." He stared at me, silent. "I don't want your apology," I added. "I want accountability." He sat, finally, quiet now. I leaned forward. "If I give you anything, it's not a loan, it's not a gift, it's an exchange." "For what?" "A stake. 49% ownership of the company, control of the mailing list, access to the books, full transparency." His eyes widened. "That's basically giving it to you." I met his stare. "Then say no, walk out, tell them you couldn't convince me." He looked at the folder again. His hands trembled. "I don't have a choice," he said. I smiled. "Now you know how I felt every time you called me the responsible one." He said yes. I made him sign on the spot. I kept the mug with me that day. Not on purpose. It had just been in my bag for my morning tea. But as I watched him scribble his name beside mine, I turned it around in my hand. That red stripe gleamed, not a symbol of something passed down, a reminder of what I'd kept. The following week, my phone didn't stop ringing. First, it was my mother. Her voice was brittle with performance, the kind of sweetness she layered on when she thought she was hiding panic. "Marissa, honey, Daniel said you two talked." He seemed a little off. "What's going on? Are you okay?" I said I was in a meeting and couldn't talk. Then Dad texted, "You need to remember family comes first. Don't make this personal." That one I didn't answer at all. I had always been personal. That was their problem with me. I remembered too much. I tracked what people said, what they promised, what they took back. In a family full of short memories and rewritten history, I was the one who never let the record blur. Daniel followed up 3 days later. This time, it was a scheduled call. Calmer, rehearsed. I could tell he'd gone to someone for advice. Probably our father. "I want to be clear," he said, "that I didn't come to you out of desperation." "Then why did you come?" "Because I respect you," he said. "And because I know you're good with logistics. I could use your mind on this." That part at least was true. He needed structure. He needed what he always mocked me for: spreadsheet tabs, deadline charts, negotiation boundaries, the bones of a real business, and I gave them to him. Slowly. Not because I'd forgiven him, but because I was taking ownership of the thing they thought I didn't deserve. I showed up at the next board call. I rewrote the product release calendar. I negotiated with the vendor he owed money to, and got them to cut the fee by 15% in exchange for a 3-month exclusivity clause. I wasn't saving Daniel, I was stabilizing my investment. A week later, I got a formal letter from our parents. It was formatted like a legal memo, headed with their names, written in cool, overcooked language about recent developments and their understanding of the current business realignment. At the bottom it said, "We trust you will honor the spirit of family and return Daniel's original share of the fund once operations are stable." I laughed when I read that. Alone, in my apartment, with the cat on my lap and the mug on my desk. I laughed until I cried. Return his share, as if it had been his to begin with. As if I was holding hostage something they hadn't already stolen from me. So I wrote back. 1 paragraph, simple. "The trust allocation was never honored equally. I have rectified that. Your request is noted." 2 days later, they showed up at my apartment. My mother knocked like she owned the building. I opened the door in sweatpants and a hoodie, no makeup, my cat hovering like a sentry by my feet. "Can we come in?" she asked, already stepping inside. I didn't answer. I just let the door swing wider. My father looked around like he hadn't expected me to live in something so modest. I saw the confusion flicker across his face, like he was recalibrating who I was. "I didn't realize you were doing this well," he said. I tilted my head. "Because I don't drive a Tesla?" He grunted. My mother cleared her throat. "We just want to talk," she said. "So talk." They sat, I stood. My mother opened her purse and pulled out a folded envelope. "This is Grandpa's final tax return," she said, setting it on the table like a peace offering. "It confirms the balance of the trust before we made the adjustments. We thought maybe you didn't have the full picture." "I do," I said. "You always think you do," my father snapped. I looked at him. "Say what you came to say." They hesitated. I didn't move. Finally, my mother sighed. "We made a mistake." I waited. "We thought Daniel needed it more. We didn't realize." "That I would find out?" I asked. She winced. "That it would hurt you like this." "You didn't think it would hurt?" I corrected. "Because you decided I didn't need. And people who don't need don't get to feel hurt." My father stood. "We didn't come here to be judged." "No," I said. "You came here to recover control." He turned to leave. My mother lingered. "Marissa," she said softly, "can we try again? Start fresh?" I picked up the mug from the counter, looked at the red stripe. I don't need a fresh start, I said. I need acknowledgement. She blinked, then nodded, almost imperceptibly. I walked them to the door. As she crossed the threshold, she said, "If you ever feel like visiting, the door's open." "No, it's not," I said, "but thanks for saying that." She looked down. Then they left. Daniel came by that weekend. Not to plead, just to talk. For once, he sat on my couch like he had years ago, minus the emotional hangover of a failed relationship. He looked tired, human. "Do you hate me?" he asked. "No." He nodded. "I deserve it if you do." "You don't deserve hate, you deserve perspective." He looked up. "I never knew about the will." "I know, I should have asked." "Yes." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. "I found this, in Grandpa's garage. It had your name on it." I opened it after he left. Inside was a watch, simple, worn, and a note. "From Marissa, because you always kept us on time." I held that note like it might evaporate. That night, I cleaned the mug for the first time in months, polished it, set it beside the watch on a shelf only I could see from my desk. I didn't need a family to circle around me. I needed a story that made sense. And now, finally, I had one. A month later, I received an invitation, not via text or email, but a formal printed card. Cream stock, gold embossed lettering. It was from my mother. "Join us for brunch to celebrate family milestones: Daniel's product relaunch, Dad's retirement, and Marissa's recent success." I read it twice, not because I was touched, but because it was surreal. My name had never been included in a celebration like this. I'd always been the one helping in the kitchen, not the one with her name printed in gold. Still, I went. Not out of hope or reconciliation. I wanted to see it for myself, the stage they'd built, now with me awkwardly inserted into a corner, like a piece of furniture they'd only recently noticed missing. The restaurant was one of those faux rustic places in a gentrified suburb. Wood beams, artisanal menus, waitstaff in flannel, the kind of place Daniel loved, trendy but expensive enough to signal legitimacy. I walked in wearing a navy pantsuit, crisp, simple, respectable. I carried nothing but my bag and a folder. Always a folder. They still hadn't figured out what that meant. Daniel was already there, in his tailored gray jacket, greeting people near the bar. I caught snippets. "We're scaling next quarter. Liquor license expansion. Direct-to-consumer pivot." His charisma was turned all the way up, performing like a man who believed again in his own myth. My parents sat near the head of a long wooden table. My mother wore pearls. My father, a smug expression that always meant he was about to accept praise for someone else's work. I walked up, smiled briefly. "You made it," my mother said, almost too eagerly. "I did." "We're just about to start," I nodded. Took a seat across from my father, next to an empty chair labeled Marissa in that same gold script. The napkin was embroidered. They really went all out. "Before we eat," my mother announced, standing up, "I'd like to say a few words." I folded my hands, watched her. "We've been through a lot this past year," she began. "Transitions, lessons, and unexpected blessings. But what remains constant is our family, our support for each other." I didn't blink. She turned to Daniel. "We're so proud of Daniel's perseverance, how he's revitalized his company, taken on a partner who's brought it to the next level." Then she looked at me. "And we're equally proud of Marissa, her guidance, her stability, her leadership." That last word landed awkwardly. She hadn't meant to say it. It slipped out, and I saw her realize it mid-sentence. But it was too late. The truth had escaped. I leaned back slightly, eyes still on her. "Would you like to say anything?" she asked me, tentative. I stood slowly, just briefly. The table went quiet. I pulled out the folder, set it on the table, opened it. "This is the updated shareholder agreement for the company. As of this week, I've finalized terms with our lead investor for a conditional capital match based on growth benchmarks. We've also secured vendor discounts for the next 3 quarters. My voice was calm, clear, professional. I turned to Daniel. "I'll need you to sign off by end of day Monday, or we forfeit the match clause." He nodded, almost dazed. "Yeah, of course." I turned back to the table. "And for those wondering, no, I'm not investing. I'm directing. There's a difference." My father's mouth opened, then closed. I sat down. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was surgical. The air had changed. I had performed no cruelty, no aggression. But the hierarchy had shifted, irrevocably. After that, the meal went on. They tried to pivot, tried to reassert the old roles. My mother told a story about Daniel's first lemonade stand. My father chuckled about my early obsession with to-do lists, but it didn't stick. The room had realigned, and they felt it. After dessert, people filtered out. Hugs, handshakes, fake promises to get coffee. I stayed seated. Daniel approached last. He looked less sure now, humble. Still handsome, still persuasive, but softer around the edges. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me a second chance. I didn't deserve it." I shook my head. It wasn't a second chance, it was a shift in control. That's different. He nodded. Still, I see it now, what you've carried, what we ignored. There it was. I picked up my bag. You're smart, Daniel, but you've coasted. You had people covering for you. That ends now. He didn't argue, he just said, I'll sign Monday. I know you will. I started to walk out. My mother called after me. Marissa? I turned. She stood, unsure, fingers twitching like she wanted to hug me but didn't dare. If you ever feel like coming by, just to sit with us, not to fix anything, we'd love that. My throat tightened. I'll think about it, I said. That was the most honest answer I could give.